Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Excellent. Apologies first, because the delay of your event was due to my tech issues. So I will keep my remarks shorter to make up for that. But thank you, David and Alex and the Lead A team for having me. Thanks for putting this event together. And thank you, Alex, for your great framing. Relating to my work, of course, I enjoyed your focus on artisanal small-scale mining, which is clearly the weakest link in a very long supply chain of mining products. In my case, I looked at a critical battery mineral, namely cobalt, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the picture that you showed certainly corresponds with what I observed on 2 field trips to the DRC, where we implemented an approach to address many of the human rights issues that have become so well known over the past years in the cobalt mining context in the DRC. So in my contribution today, I will draw on my research on responsible cobalt sourcing from the DRC, and I will highlight 3 measures that I believe can mitigate conflict. And they all revolve around an approach that is called the formalization of artisanal mining, which means that these informal activities are brought officially into the formal supply chain by setting and enforcing sourcing standards. And this includes creating decent workplaces and creating safe workplaces for the miners that are often called illegal miners, but they're wrongly called illegal miners. It's an informal activity, but artisanal mining is actually not illegal in the DRC. And as Alex pointed out, if you're a company operating in the mining context in the DRC, the presence of artisanal miners is just a business reality that you cannot wish away, because indeed those communities have been mining for decades or for generations. There's nothing else to do for them either. There's no diversified industry. That's often very, very poor communities that are struggling to survive, that feed often very large families with the mining activities. And this is not something that a large mining corporation can define away. However, this is the most common way to date to deal with this informal activity, which is really omnipresent. So anyone who's ever traveled to a mining area, for example, the Lualaba province in the copper and cobalt belt of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, will have seen the artisanal miners everywhere on those tailings. Hundreds of people often looking through the rubbles to still find valuable material that they can sell to often small traders, often Chinese traders, that then transport the material to refineries in the DRC and then to China, where clearly all material is being mixed. And understanding those mixing points in the supply chain is very important, because large companies that currently put in their contracts that they're not sourcing from an artisanal mine, they are not understanding the supply chain dynamics and supply chain structures, where clearly material from industrial mines and artisanal mines are being brought together at refineries in the DRC and at refineries in China. And so there's absolutely no way to say with certainty that there's no artisanally mined cobalt, for example, in a company's product, let's say an electric car or an electronic product like our computers or our phones. And this is important to understand, because it establishes, I think, a responsibility of everyone in need of these critical minerals to also engage with the human rights challenges related to artisanal mining. So I've now explained what the formalization of artisanal mining would entail, and I'm happy to elaborate on the technical details of how a formalized mining site could look like later. But from the conflict perspective, clearly we've seen anecdotally there were not that many formalization projects yet, but the ones that exist clearly showed that as You stop chasing the artisanal miners out of the industrial mining concessions. And this is where artisanal miners flock to, because they have proven geological, they have done geological studies that prove that the minerals are present at the specific site. So this is why the artisanal miners often come to the industrial mine sites. And instead of chasing them out, a formalized artisanal mine site would actually invite them in and say, we give you a portion of a land where you can safely do your activity. The pilot project that I witnessed in the DRC did exactly that. And it was a mine site in the Lualaba province, and the concession is called Mutoshi, close to Kolwezi, a mining town. And this Mutoshi concession had previously experienced massive tensions with the local community, including a kidnapping, including a manager of the mine operating company called Shemaf, which is a Dubai-based company, has been, I think, severely injured and then has been killed in these community tensions, and also slowed down and halted their operations. And to address these tensions with the community, as a trading company based in Switzerland called Trafigura got involved, they decided to support Shemaf in putting together a formalization project. And instead of pushing out the artisanal miners that had been active on the site for decades, inviting them in, giving them a piece of land, and establishing standards for the extraction process. And the most significant change they made to the typical artisanal mining activities was they changed the extraction method. Because typically artisanal miners, they dig with their bare hands or very basic tools until they reach the ore. This means they have to dig tunnels. And of course, those tunnels can be very dangerous in a geological terrain that is rather loose, should require major timber construction to make those tunnel roofings safer. And instead, they created what's called open pits. So the miners no longer dig down. Those tunnels, by the way, are sometimes 90 meters deep. The miners suffer oxygen deprivation when they work at such depths, and these tunnels collapse and bury miners alive. And those accidents happen frequently, but they're rarely documented. So these open pits take away the dangers that come from the tunnels, and it allowed the miners to work open air, and it increased their production, because if you have to bring material up from a deep tunnel, of course, this takes time and effort. And when you work on open tailings, you don't waste any time, or it's immediately accessible, and it increased their production. What also really helped this mining community was the fact that through the open pit extraction method, they were able to integrate women in the extraction process. And this is unusual because in this cultural context, women are often not allowed close to extraction sites. There's a belief that harms the productivity. But at this specific mine site, it was thanks to the work of the cooperative and the fact that they could work on open pits, that the women of the community could be fully integrated in the extractive process, which had a number of effects. First of all, the integration of women often brought more peace to the mine sites. And also, it increased the household incomes of those often very poor mining families, because all of a sudden you had two people supporting the production, and those parents could then use the income to send their children to school. So the formalization of artisanal mining and the full integration of women in the extractive process actually allowed addressing a root cause of child labor in this context. Increased household income, they were able to send their kids to school instead of to the mines. And generally, the empowerment of women in the community again, anecdotally, apparently made the operations a lot more peaceful. To enable such a project to be successful, also successful from a security perspective, I think what was key in this specific instance was the engagement with and through the cooperative. The cooperative, in this specific case, had a remarkable leader, just an individual who was a natural leader. And the co-op had also been around for many, many years. So it was a very established cooperative, not one that was just created. And they clearly saw the benefits of formalization and became very proud to be the guardians of this project. They were also given uniforms and personal protective equipment, which again made them very proud to guard this project. And of course, the co-op served as the intermediary between the community and the mine operating company. And they socialized this whole formalization process with the community. And because, well, the project was able to host 5,000 miners, because 5,000 miners benefited from a much safer and much more less strenuous mine site. They saw the benefits firsthand. It was, however, really important to do what I don't want to say supervision of the cooperative, but more like hand-holding of the cooperative, so that the cooperative itself could build up their own capacity. So the co-op learned how to do bits of admin. For example, there were identity cards for everyone who had officially signed up to be part of the project. They also were the ones that conducted regular controls for alcohol, because no drunk person was allowed on the mine site. It increases the risk of accidents. So it was the co-op that actually walked around and checked if there was a drunk person on site. Same for entry and exit controls. It was the co-op that actually managed entry to the site. And if there was, for example, a visibly pregnant woman, they said, no, you cannot work here. So it was support, like there was a civil society organization called PACT in this case that supported the cooperative to assume all these functions and become fully competent guardian of this mine site. And I think this was very important to provide the capacity building and training to the co-op, because eventually you want such a project to be fully sustainable. It was initiated by, well, a consortium of actors, but I would say the Swiss commodity trading firm Trafigura was in the lead. And they also paid the NGO on site to support the co-op. But eventually you want the co-op to be the boss and take over this formalization project. And it should no longer be a project. It should just be a well-run, formalized artisanal mine site for the medium to long term. And unfortunately, this specific project, which I think did prove the point that you can formalize an artisanal mine site, and you can also, from a downstream company perspective, source cobalt responsibly from an artisanal mine site if it's been formalized in a good way. This clearly, you know, the point has been proven that formalization works and that you can source responsibly from a formalized artisanal mine site. But unfortunately, this project came to an end because of COVID. At the COVID outbreak, the project partners decided that they didn't want the mine site to become the epicenter for a COVID outbreak in the country, in a country that only had 3 ventilators, apparently. So they closed the project, which of course in hindsight wasn't such a good decision, because as I explained at the beginning, those communities need to feed their families. There's nothing else that they can do. And the mining continued despite of the fact that the project was officially closed. At some point, the fence that had been erected around the mine site had been torn down, And of course, at some point, the ore was depleted at the level of the open pits, which meant that the miners had to start digging again. And I visited the site in December 2020, and then again in December 2022, sorry, in September 2020 and in December 22. So I saw the site during the formalization period and afterwards again. And returning was sad because the mine site had, again, about 150 tunnels, some of them very deep, some of them very dangerous. And I visited in December, and in November alone, the co-op diligently documented the death of 7 miners on that site. So the cooperative tried to uphold some of the standards, but because they had no support anymore, they couldn't, for example, uphold the extraction method, namely open pits, which requires regular machinery to be brought in and earth to be removed with that machinery about every 6 months. And because they didn't have that anymore, of course, those tunnels massively increased health and safety risks again on the mine site. In terms of the community conflict, which was clearly, calming down as this formalization project was showing such positive impacts, tensions kept rising again as the project petered out during the pandemic time. And another strain has been the fact that in this case, the cobalt price had come down so significantly, and the mine site is actually currently no longer used by artisanal miners for cobalt mining, but they're now looking for copper, which has had a slightly higher and more stable price point. But the community is suffering significantly, and currently there's no end in sight because, unfortunately, the business relationship between Trafigura, the driver of this project, and the mine operating company have come to an end. The mine operating company, if I understood correctly, is sort of bankrupt right now, and it might be sold very soon, possibly to a Chinese buyer. And then I'm almost certain that a Chinese mine operating company would not resurrect the formalization project, but it could, and I don't want to imagine that, but what we've seen in other cases, and Alex referred to that, sometimes these big companies then call in the National Guard. The National Guard is then tasked to forcibly remove those artisanal miners from the mine site. And of course, once a not so well-trained National Guard is involved, the risk of injury and death is very high. And the community, because they are mining also out of desperation, will push back. So this is the unfortunate outlook of a very, very promising formalization project that I documented in this report. In case you're interested, it's available on the website of the Geneva Centre for Business and Human Rights. And I end here, and I'm happy to answer questions later.
Thank you very much, Dorothée.